Once upon a time, 6,000 years ago, a story was told about a blacksmith who sold his soul in a pact with the devil in return for supernatural abilities, creating, we think, the very first fairy tale, which makes fairy tales older than any literary record, so it's pretty remarkable that we still have the story. But then again, it's not, because it's actually just the magic of storytelling through oral history, enabling the stories to be passed down and adapted to fit many different cultures. Oh no, you can't really see them, but I have got a little sparkly star. In the 1800s, the Brothers Grimm popularised the fairy tales in the way we know now, but they're actually based on a very vast cultural history, not just the European ones that we tend to think they are today. The ones the brothers shared were actually relatively new, having their origins in the 1500s, but when you look at their real true origins, they're based on similar stories from the ancient world with classical mythology. I don't know if I've explained that well at all because the glitter is stressing me out, but I explained it a lot better over on YouTube. Oh my god, that looks crazy! Don't show your teeth with this lipstick. Basically what I'm trying to say is that fairy tales have prehistoric origins. They've been adapted through time through different cultures. So we think that Sleeping Beauty comes from the 1800s, but actually their story was based on one from the 1500s, and their story is based on one from blah 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 and blah blah blah. So they're all different variations, and they're all very, very old. So there's not much more to say about him, or there's not much more that I know about him. Someone in the comments might prove me wrong, but he was a wrestler, the wrestling partner and personal trainer to the Emperor Commodus. In the year 192, conspirators led by a praetorian prefect got Narcissus in to help them assassinate the emperor because some previous plots had failed and they really needed to get rid of him at this point. So on the 31st of December in the year 192, Commodus's mistress, or concubine, poisoned his wine, which didn't actually kill him, and he just got really, really drunk. So Narcissus goes in and strangles him to death while he's in the bath. Some say though that Commodus wasn't just drunk from too much wine, and he was actually ill because of the poison, and that he wasn't in the bath, he was in bed, but you get the idea. In Greek mythology, though, there is a Narcissus as well, and he was a hunter from Thespi or Thespi. I never actually know if I'm saying that right, but he was well known because of his beauty. One day he was at a spring and he saw his own reflection in the water and he fell in love with it, and he died there, staring at it. And then the flower that bears his name is said to have sprung up from the spot where he died, which I didn't know there was a Narcissus flower before researching this video. So given the fact that he died because he fell in love with his own reflection, you could say the personality trait, that was really difficult, the personality trait is named after him as well, I think. I think the idea of it being the personality trait comes from Freudian psychology and psychiatry. But it was Robert Wilder who conceptualised narcissism as a personality trait in 1925. I look a bit like a lion today. Do you know what? We're going to go with it. I can't be bothered to straighten my fringe. Of course I can, but what do you want to know? Maybe that the Romans used to fill the Colosseum with water to recreate famous naval battles? Or maybe that the Greeks ate dinner lying on their sides, or that their breakfast would have been some bread dipped in olive oil, or that the Romans ate flamingo tongues. Also, I'm sorry if I sound a bit weird, I got my Invisalign fitted this week and I feel like I sound and look really bizarre, so moving on. In ancient Greece, Draco was the first to introduce a written down penal code which basically said that death would be the punishment for pretty much any crime. The Roman Emperor Tiberius banned kissing in public. In ancient Greece, the most common poison was water hemlock, which I believe is how Socrates died. Some Roman emperors would ingest a small amount of poison each day to build up an immunity to it because assassination was a real fear. Ancient Greek athletes wrestled other men naked and covered in oil and then sold their sweat off as medicine, as did the ancient Roman gladiators actually. So that's a similarity. Also, because the Roman gladiators were the celebrities of the day, women would buy their sweat as an aphrodisiac as well. In ancient Greece, crocodile dung was used as eyeshadow or as a way to treat scars like a medicine, because documents say levigate the dung of a land crocodile with water and anoint, so it can help treat your scars as well. Whereas the ancient Romans would use butter and barley flour for their spots, and the ashes of snails for sun damage. In ancient Greece, maybe as long ago as 206 BCE, the first analog computer was created. Yep, the one Indiana Jones was searching for in his latest film. The Antikythera mechanism measured the movements of the heavens with a clock face that essentially was tracking the movements of the planets. And ancient Rome gave us the 12-month Julian calendar based on the solar year. I thought it was called the lunar year. Why have I written solar? Anyway, I hope that's enough. New lip oil. I hope that's enough random history. I feel like we covered a lot of eras. We've never done Aztecs on this channel before, I don't think, so yes, of course we can. They are probably most famous for their human sacrifices, do you think? And apparently they sacrificed 20,000 people every single year. The Aztec Empire ruled over Mexico for 300 years until the 1400s when the Spanish invaded. So I believe they are the last great Mesoamerican empire. Correct me if I'm wrong, please, because this isn't my area. But they did invent chocolate. Their ritual practices included skinning, dismembering, or ripping out people's hearts while they were still alive. But they also appreciated the arts with carving, pottery and painting too. They weren't complete dismembering monsters. It's thought that they developed this, is it called indenture? Slave trade, where if you had a really bad debt, you could just sell yourself off as a slave to then pay off that debt, or a slave could work hard enough and earn enough money to eventually buy their freedom. It's thought that actually possibly smallpox killed off the Aztec population rather than just the Spanish invaders. But did they bring the smallpox to them? They had complex writing system and kept actually quite good records of things. They made school compulsory, but they were divided up into different social classes and then by gender as well. Having multiple wives was a good status symbol, but you would only publicly celebrate your first marriage. They stretched out their children to make them grow if they thought they weren't growing tall enough by dangling them in the air, holding them by the neck. A boy couldn't become a man until he captured someone in battle. Women painted their face and body yellow to represent maturity. But those working in a temple would dye their hair and teeth black because it showed the magic of the arts and the wisdom of a sorceress. That was the Aztecs. Hypnos was the god of sleep, relaxation and dreams, and he resided in the underworld. He's often depicted with poppies, the flower which is now known for its sleep-inducing properties. And during the Trojan War, Hera got him to send Zeus, king of the gods, to sleep so that she could interfere with what was going on. So he was really quite powerful. Adrestia was the goddess of revolt and the equilibrium between good and bad, and she's often depicted next to Nemesis, the goddess of retribution and revenge. Aristeus, or Aristeus, but I think it's Aristeus, was the protector of certain arts, like random things like beekeeping and cheese making, and he was taught the crafts by nymphs before then passing on his knowledge to humans. Orcos was the god, or personification actually, of the curse that would befall anyone who broke their oath, and he has 11 siblings, and they're all the personification of a bad situation, like lying, murder, pain, that kind of thing. Melinoe was the bringer of nightmares and madness, because she was the daughter of Persephone, but with Zeus, because Zeus came to Persephone disguised as Hades, and she ended up having a baby, and when Hades found out about the baby, he ripped her apart completely, but she somehow survived and came out the other side. Clearly a very powerful goddess. But, being nightmares and madness would make sense if you were torn apart as a baby. Achillois or Achillois washes away your pain with her calming presence as one of the goddesses of the moon. Apathy was the daughter of Nyx, the personification of night, so naturally is the goddess of lies, trickery and deception. Hyacinth you might have heard of from Greek mythology, but he was a young boy who was a lover of Apollo, who one day they were playing with a discus and Apollo accidentally threw it too hard, hit Hyacinth in the back of the head and killed him. And then on the spot where he died, Apollo turned his body into the flower. King Erysichethon chopped down a sacred grove, which of course upset Demeter, who cursed him to have an insatiable hunger forevermore, and he ended up dying because he ate himself. Asclepius was actually born with a mortal woman from a mortal woman and Apollo, but that meant that he was an amazing healer, so much so that he could actually bring people back from the dead, but Hades complained about that to Zeus, who killed him with his thunderbolt. So then Asclepius was honoured as a god, and temples were the place where people would go to for healing. The first woman noted or known by name in history in the field of science and medicine for both her contributions and work and research lived in ancient Egypt in around 2700 BCE, and it's thought that she was the chief physician of the pharaoh's court at the time, because that's what the inscription on a grave says. But it turns out upon further research that throughout history her story has become muddled with other women in the field, because the first time she appears in history books is in 1938. In that year came the book A History of Women in Medicine, which is where the mix-up began. But it's not totally disappointing, because if we do have that mix-up, it means that there were female doctors in the ancient times for them to muddle. So it's not all bad. There were women at the time, and there is evidence that matches the story of the female doctor told in the book. The details are all the same, it's just a different name. So the story does still exist, it's just not Merit-Ptah, perhaps. The first female doctor of the Old Kingdom practiced during Queen Neferurika Ra's reign, and I believe the son of the chief physician was a high priest, and on his tomb there was a tablet that said his mother was the chief physician. Then in a tomb in the Valley of the Kings is a picture of a woman with the name Merit-Ptah, the mother of a high priest who had called her the chief physician. But the Valley of the Kings wasn't used until 1,000 years later than this story appears, or would have been happening. And the name Merit-Ptah doesn't appear on any lists of Egyptian healers from the Old Kingdom, so it's thought that possibly the tomb was actually just depicting a story instead, rather than a real woman, disappointingly. But it's also possible that Merit-Ptah could have been the daughter of another healer, Presihet, but to be honest with you, I had to look all this up online to find out more to share with you, so if there are any budding Egyptologists in the comments, please feel free to clarify for us. Happy winter solstice everyone, if you're seeing this on the 21st. If you're not, it's officially the shortest day of the year, so we are on our way back to summer. Some of the stones of Stonehenge marked the sunrise today, which is why a lot of the theories say that Stonehenge was sort of calendar. A bit of science, just to explain it though, if you want to know. So the Earth rotates on a tilted axis, which means that for half of the year, either half of the globe, is it a globe or an Earth? Either way, one half is like away from and one is towards the sun. So if this is the sun, we like rotate on a tilted axis, so we're like this. If this is us and this is Australia, so right now we're like this because it's Australia's summer and our winter, and then when we get around to June, we're facing the sun and Australia's facing away. Do you get what I mean? So that's why it happens. So today, during the winter solstice, the Earth is pointed on its furthest axis away from the sun. So for over here on the northern hemisphere, we have our shortest day and longest night. And the sun is at its lowest point in the sky. In ancient times, the marking of this passing of time was important, and especially people living at Stonehenge would have been farmers with crops and animals, so it was important for them to know the seasons as well. And they probably were celebrating a lot at this time because the winter seasons would have been quite daunting for people in ancient cultures, and realistically through a lot of history, because they don't live in the luxuries that we do now. So it's possible that the Neolithic people built Stonehenge so that they could track the changing of the seasons and know exactly when to celebrate. Because the stones on the site, specific ones, directly align with the sunrise and sunset. So I believe today it's the sunset, and then on the summer solstice on June 21st, the sun rises in between two specific stones as well. And excavations at prehistoric sites like Stonehenge show that people celebrated this time, the winter solstice, with huge feasts. So if you're celebrating, I hope you have a lovely feast tonight and enjoy the coming of spring. A lot of our Christmas traditions come from the Victorians and Albert's Germanic heritage. So Victoria and Albert started a lot of traditions that then inspired and caught the nation. Trees in the royal household were decorated with candles and other little trinkets, but Prince Albert wasn't the first royal to bring Christmas trees over from Germany. It was actually Queen Charlotte, the wife of King George III, who brought them over because she was also raised in Germany. And so the first Christmas tree in a royal household was in the Queen's Lodge in 1800, but we tend to think more of Victoria and Albert because of the famous illustration of the family around a Christmas tree that was published in 1846. No, 1848. The Christmas card first appeared in 1843 because actually the first director of the Victoria and Albert Museum, Sir Henry Cole, commissioned the artist J.C. Horsley to design a festive greeting card for him to give out personally to his friends, but he then sold them on to the public as well. And it is really worth looking up Victorian Christmas cards because some are truly bizarre. Rich people would have enjoyed a festive turkey and poorer families a Christmas goose, as you probably know from Charles Dickens. Some of the poorer families would have joined a goose club where they could pay for their Christmas bird in instalments throughout the year. And the Christmas cracker first appeared in 1840 after a sweet shop owner called Tom Smith had taken a trip to Paris, where he saw bonbons, which were the little French sweets wrapped in paper. So when he came home, he created crackers, I would assume a little sweet wrapped in paper, but by 1860 he had perfected that cracking sound we all know, and Christmas crackers became a tradition filled with jokes, sweets, little trinkets, the things we'd recognise today. You all know the reason we celebrate Christmas now, but these are some other winter festive celebrations. The winter solstice was celebrated on the 25th of December in the ancient and prehistoric worlds. It celebrated the rebirth of the sun and the end of winter, and the sunset or sunrise on that day perfectly lines up with the stones on Stonehenge, so could that be what it was built for? Saturnalia was the ancient Roman festival that's celebrated on the 17th, 21st. It lasted a week of December, and it's celebrated again. The sun god, the return of spring, the end of winter, the return of harvest, and that was the ancient Roman version that they then brought over here as well. Yule was the Germanic and Anglo-Saxon word for the feast that would happen during the winter solstice. So again, those cultures were celebrating the changing of the season, giving thanks for the food they'd had that year. And interestingly, a Yule log wouldn't have been a chocolate cake as we think it is today. So in the Tudor period and probably the rest of that era of medieval history, the Yule log was a big log that the family would burn in their fire for the festive period. That was the end of that sentence. I don't know where I thought I was going. I'm not too sure if I've got this 100% accurate, but in the Netherlands they revered Sir Nicholas or Santa Claus at this time in December So then when Dutch settlers went over to North America, they took the traditions with them, and then American writers altered it into the St. Nicholas we know now, who leaves presents on Christmas Eve and rides his sleigh. The earliest known reference to Sir Christmas or Lord Christmas, who would become our Father Christmas, was in a 15th century carol where he was telling people to drink and celebrate rather than actually giving gifts. And in medieval times, households would have a Lord of Misrule or a Lord of Christmas who was in charge of all the festive entertainment and merriment, which is a tradition that I like. So I hope you'll have a lovely festive season, a good winter solstice, and I hope you don't get poorly. New Year's celebrations have of course always happened throughout history, but they happen at different times and they're celebrated in different ways. The earliest New Year festivals were in 2000 BCE in ancient Mesopotamia or Babylon. Their New Year started in March with the first new moon after the vernal equinox, which was a day in late March where we had equal sunlight and darkness. During this time they celebrated the religious festival of Akitu with 11 days of rituals. They celebrated the myth of their sun god Marduk, who was victorious at this time over Tiamat, their evil goddess of the sea. Yes. Or an evil sea goddess, rather. And it was a time when their new kings would be crowned. The calendar that was used in the Roman Republic's year began on the 1st of March, but in 153 BCE, we still only had 10 months, but it was moved to begin on January the 1st, being named after their god Janus, the god of beginnings. But then in 46 BCE, Julius Caesar decided to create the Julian calendar, and he added 2 more months, so our 12-month year linked back up with the movement of the sun, luckily, so when the year began on January the 1st, we were following the movements of the sun again. Again, we never had. We start following the movements of the sun and the months link up to seasons a bit more. In 1870, New Year's was made a federal holiday in the US. But New Year's still today is celebrated at different times for different cultures, like in Iran they celebrate it in March, and the Maori culture celebrate it in either June or July. And of course there's different traditions as well, like in Spain they eat 12 grapes under a table to represent the 12 months of the year, and you'll get good luck in each one of them. So I might be doing that this year. The New Year's party I'm going to this year has a theme, and we have to come dressed as someone from history, like a historical figure. So I have this costume, but I don't know who it is. So any suggestions in the comments, please let me know. From what I've seen online though, this feels like a 16th century working woman's outfit. Obviously it is in no way historically accurate, but it's just a bit of fun. So maybe I'm some sort of Elizabethan maid or something. If anyone has a name of someone I could be, please let me know. Of course, information on, well, everything to do with the lower class throughout history isn't really well preserved, but specifically in the clothes as well, because there's no remaining material of their cheaper materials they would have had access to, or iconography, paintings, written things. There's not much evidence to go on, which is why it's kind of a guesstimate for fashion historians sometimes. Although please, if there's one watching, prove me wrong, give me a name of someone. There are some paintings from the 16th century of like scenes of like a place where you can see poor people in the background, which is why I've plumped a guess. I've never said that before, which is why I've guessed 16th century, because I feel like I would blend in the background of those paintings, you know, like. So if we are gonna go with a historically inaccurate Elizabethan England costume, clothes started to become more elaborate and colourful. So I may have been wearing this colour in Tudor England, you never know. So being more elaborate than previous eras, of course, things become more decorated as well, like big feather hats or dresses were embroidered with, this is really difficult, pearls and jewels, and then the commoners, the poorer people, started to try and replicate those looks, but just with cheaper materials. If you did dress too much above your status, that you could genuinely be fined by the authorities and have those items taken off of you. So yeah, that's not really much information to give you all, but that's what I'm going for, and I hope you'll have a lovely new year. If you could let me know any ideas of who I could be before tomorrow night, that would be amazing, because then I could actually have someone to call myself as I walk in just like this. Happy New Year! Prince William's ancestry can be traced back to Mary Queen of Scots and Henry VIII through both his mother and his father. Dinosaur coprolites, or fossilised poofs, have been found 2/3 the size of a gallon in one lump. I think that's the biggest one, or their average size poo would have been about 4 gallons altogether. I've got no perception of how big that actually is though. Maybe I should have found a comparison. And apparently Charles I wore 2 shirts to his execution so that people didn't see him shivering. But let's just circle back to those current royals for a minute. Oh, did I just say circle back? So William and Harry's mum, Lady Diana Spencer, is the 11th great-granddaughter of Mary Queen of Scots, which is interesting within itself. But that goes back to the big man has a... That felt wrong. I'm not cool enough to say that. It goes back to Henry VIII because, hang on, Mary's dad was James V of Scotland, whose mum was Margaret Tudor, the sister of Henry VIII. Cool, right? And then their dad, our King Charles III, was the 14th great-grandson of Mary Queen of Scots, and actually a lot of their family comes from that lineage, like Victoria, George's 1, 2, 3, they all come from that line, so they're all related. So Diana and Charles were related as well, distantly but still related. Charles has the more like direct line to Mary Queen of Scots. Diana's comes from some sort of brother or something somewhere. To be honest with you, I got a bit confused looking at their family trees, but they are interesting to look at if you wanted to look and find out if I am completely wrong. That would be really great, wouldn't it? But Diana's ancestry is really interesting because it includes loads of different famous names that I know and you'll definitely know, like King Edward III, the Henry Percys, Elizabeth Woodville, William Gascoigne and Joanna of Castile. What a cool lineage, although that means everyone's connected. But we knew that anyway, didn't we? That's not a new thing to tell you guys. I just learnt that Princess Diana was related to Anne Boleyn, and our now Queen, or is it Queen Consort? Camilla is related to Jane Seymour, but let me explain why that's so interesting. After things went wrong, Henry VIII wanted to remove the Boleyns from his life, his court, the monarchy, from history essentially, and obviously he failed because we all know a lot about them anyway, but he also failed because 400 years later another distantly related Boleyn married back into the royal family. Henry VIII's sister, Margaret Tudor, has a son, King James V of Scotland, who has a daughter, Mary Queen of Scots, who then 10 daughters later, we get Diana Spencer and then William and Harry. So they're related to Mary Queen of Scots from both their mum and dad, interestingly, but that's another video. And a complete sidetrack to the point of this video. Anne Boleyn has a sister, Mary Boleyn, who then has children, and 13 grandchildren later, we get Diana. So that line starts with the daughter of Mary Boleyn, who was Lady Catherine Carey, who's actually rumoured to be an illegitimate daughter of King Henry VIII because Mary Boleyn was a rumoured mistress of Henry VIII, but it's all just rumours. Kate Middleton and Sarah Ferguson actually both have ancestry with Mary Boleyn as well, which just feels absolutely crazy. But when Diana marries Charles, she brings the Boleyns back into the royal family, only to be kicked out by Camilla Parker Bowles, or our queen. So a Boleyn is kicked out of the monarchy by a Seymour again. Do you see what I'm saying? History is literally repeating itself. Henry VIII was still married to Anne Boleyn when he started courting one of her maids and one of his cousins, Jane Seymour, in 1536. Actually, she was one of his second cousins. Not that that really makes a huge difference to the story. Which sounds quite similar to the scandal of the 90s, doesn't it? maybe some similar family traits. Charles is related to Henry VIII, Diana's related to Anne Boleyn, and Camilla's related to Jane Seymour. And the stories sent the press and the history books absolutely mental, didn't they? Queen Camilla is more loosely related to Jane Seymour than Diana was to Anne Boleyn, but it's still related. So Jane Seymour's great-granddad, Philip Wentworth, had a brother Henry, who then had a child, who then, 16 children later, we get our current queen, Camilla. So yes, okay, these are all very distant relations, but what do you expect? I'm comparing the Tudors and the women of the 1500s to women who were alive until recently, or are still alive. It's a very long time, but it's still a relation, and I think it's a very fun idea. Actually, it wasn't fun for those involved, but the Boleyn-Seymour rivalry for a king is still alive and well. A funny coincidence of history, rather, should I say.